I am going to start with Godfrey Chaucer, one of the most important authors where we start actually nourishing students for the course of English literature. And Godfrey Chaucer, who was born in 1340 and died in 1400. And yes, students, even if you are preparing for UGC NET, PGT, TGT, MA English, BA English, IS Mains, PCS English, any examination, or you even are a student of IGNOU, Godfrey Chaucer, you have to read it. So you can take all the course, whatever is there for you with OSN Academy. So let us come students and start with Godfrey Chaucer and listen it carefully. See, to William Caxton, who was the first English printer who brought this printing press to England, Godfrey Chaucer was the worshipful father and first founder and embellisher of the ornate eloquence in our English. Perceptive as this accolade was in its time, Chaucer is also associated not only as the father of English poetry, but also as the father of modern short story and novel. In short, we can say that he is the father of English literature. And in addition to this, students, we are also indebted to Chaucer for the most vivid contemporary descriptions of the 14th century England, which he has penned down through his beautiful poems, maybe like Prologue, maybe Canterbury Tales, maybe other of his poems. Chaucer was a man of affairs as well as a man of letters. A man of letters means he was actually a genius, and his development, his overall development as the one was very much closely paralleled by his development as the other. Born into a family which belonged to the rising middle class, he obtained through his father a family business, a successful wine merchant. A position of a page as a household which was very closely associated with the court of King Edward III. And who was King Edward III? He was that monarch who ruled for more than 50 years. And he was a brave, chivalrous and one of the ablest rulers to rule the kingdom of England. Chaucer's mastery of Latin, his mastery of French and his mastery of Latin, that is 3 languages, Latin, French and Italian. And in addition to it, to equipping him for the diplomatic missions and the civil services, it also enabled him to translate the literary works in all 3 languages. And this is a very important factor in the development of Chaucer's genius as a writer. Chaucer was also a court favorite, and he rose quickly in the world. His name and fame was very widely popular, and before he was 20 years of age, he served as a soldier in France, and upon being captured, was ransomed by his king. Thereafter, throughout his life, he served his country loyally, dutifully, and he was also a courtier, a diplomat, a civil administrator, and even a translator. He was entrusted with many important and delicate diplomatic missions. And because of these diplomatic missions, he had to travel on various occasions to France, sometimes to Italy, and his journeys abroad actually played a very important and integral part in making his literary genius, in making his intellectual development rise to this scale, which we are reading after hundreds of years. Fine. And yes, don't forget that he was a member of parliament, he was justice of the peace, he was clerk of the works at Westminster Abbey, the Tower of London and elsewhere, and finally as also a sub-forester of one of the king's forest. King का जो forest था उसका वो sub-forester भी था. And in short, we can say that he was a highly valued public servant and was very fortunate and lucky to enjoy most of his life the patronage of the influential John of Gaunt. And who was John of Gaunt, students? He was Duke of Lancaster and the uncle of King Richard II. And during his long public career, he became acquainted with the most important men of the day, बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट लोगों से उसकी मुलाकात हुई डिप्लोमेट से, रूलर्स से, एज वेल एज ग्रेट राइटर्स एंड कॉन्टेम्परेरी पोएट्स. एंड एट हिज डेथ, his reputation as a man of letters, as a man of affairs, and his genius as a poet well established, he was buried in Westminster's Abbey, जहाँ की बहुत ही पॉपुलर लोगों को वहाँ पे जो है जगह मिलती है. Today, in the history of English literature, Chaucer's name stands second only to that of Shakespeare. So students, you can imagine getting the name second in comparison to the position of Chaucer is in itself a great thing in his life. And one of the most important contribution by Chaucer to English literature was his development of the resources of English language for writing purposes, for literary purposes. In his day, English was still considered primarily as a rough peasant language. England's Norman rulers, if you have heard my initial lectures of the Anglo-Saxon period in the Norman conquest, so England's Norman rulers had introduced French to England. I had given this lecture to you students in my previous lectures of UGC Net 2. England's Norman rulers had introduced French to England, and his language was still spoken in court circles and also by the aristocracy. Church Latin was used in the monasteries, which was a center of learning, and it was still at the command of the educated people. Although the earlier poets had written in the primitive English, there was very little English literature beyond the range of traditional and anonymous ballads. Fine. And when Godfrey Chaucer actually began to write, he had to proceed by trial and error, taking a lot of models first from the French and then from some Italian sources and some of the native languages, native tongues and the dialects. And Chaucer himself spoke late Middle English. वो खुद बोलता था late Middle English and the London speech of his day. And it was by using this language instead of the most fashionable French language that was very much popular in that time. And as a writer, Chaucer was extremely prolific. He has also written, you can say, in his early short lyrics which he had written, and longer works which he has written, like the Book of the Duchess. We see the influence of the French poetry of his day. He was very much influenced by the French people, by the French poems, and because of this he could write the Book of the Duchess. And later when we see in the works like the Parliament of Fowls, Troilus and Cressida, his writing is basically influenced by the Italian masters. And who are these Italian masters? Dante, Petrarch and Boccaccio. Dante, Petrarch and Boccaccio. And by 1386, when he began the Canterbury Tales, the great magnum opus, one of the 10 gems to be taken into account in the entire world of English, his most ambitious work, he became the master of his craft. वो अपने क्राफ्ट का मास्टर बन गया. And for the Canterbury Tales, Chaucer has used the structured device of the frame story which he has taken, and a very popular story which he has used in 1001 Tales of the Arabian Nights entertainment. फाइन, जो कि अरेबियन नाइट्स आपने शायद पढ़ा होगा, उसी प्रकार का कोई फ्रेम इसने लिया. एंड द 100 टेल्स ऑफ इवन Boccaccio's Decameron. If you go through Boccaccio's Decameron, you will find that yes, Chaucer was highly influenced, and that is why he could take out the prologue and the Canterbury Tales. Fine. Now, Chaucer in these tales, or you can say as a frame, he chose a springtime pilgrimage. आपने देखा होगा जब पोएम की शुरुआत होती है तो अप्रैल का महीना आता है, that is spring time. So he has chosen the time springtime pilgrimage to Canterbury Cathedral, which is a site which is known, which is a splendid shrine of Thomas à Becket, who had been murdered 2 centuries before. And in Chaucer's day, it was a customary, मतलब tradition था ये throughout the Europe for the members of all classes to travel to many religious shrines to seek miraculous cures and to gain remission of all their sins, to expiate all their sins, and even you can say simply to satisfy their wanderlust. Wanderlust मतलब होता है घूमना फिरना. तो जैसे आपने देखा होगा कि लोग मंदिर मस्जिद चारों तरफ जाते हैं, हिंदुस्तान में जाते हैं, बाहर जाते हैं, बट कहीं न कहीं उनके पीछे बैकग्राउंड में उनके ये रहता है कि चलो इसी बहाने घूम लेंगे. So this is called wanderlust. In this way, in that time also people used to visit shrine, but in the back of their mind they used to enjoy something. Fine. In England, the pilgrimage to Canterbury was by far the most popular, and to this day traces of the old pilgrims way still persist. आज भी हम उस चीज को देख सकते हैं. And Chaucer's choice of the frame of the Canterbury Tales, in addition to giving equal scope to his talents as the narrator, as the philosopher, as a dramatist, as an observer, had several other advantages too. And by using this device of a journey, it was actually possible for so many people to bring together and quite naturally make them feel friendly in this by coming from various occupations and even from various diverse social ranks, which was a very rarity in the medieval society, coming from so many sectors and eating together, sleeping together, enjoying together. Fine. So the characters who are basically members of the feudal system are related to the land. And who are these characters? They are the knight, the squire, the yeoman, the franklin, the reeve, the miller, the ploughman, and so many others. Approximately 29 characters. And those in the ecclesiastical order represent individualists belonging to the medieval church. Fine. And the parson, the summoner, the monk, the prioress, the friar, the pardoner, and the student. The other pilgrims are also professional and mercantile laymen from the fast growing towns of the Chaucer's day, like yes, the physician, the lawyer, the manciple, the merchant, the shipman, the tradesman, the cook, the wife of Bath, who is also a cloth maker, and the innkeeper. So these are the structures, these are the people from all walks of life, and which Chaucer tried to bring them together to visit the Canterbury Shrine. And Chaucer's plan for the Canterbury Tales was an ambitious one. It was a very ambitious plan, and it was a very successful plan, and each pilgrim was to tell 2 stories on the way to Canterbury and 2 return to Canterbury to London. The poet died, however, before this plan was realized, and instead of proposing 124 stories, he wrote only 24. कुल 24 जो है टेल्स हमारे पास हैं. And the portion of this work which was completed, however, it is considered to be a masterpiece of vivid and realistic writing. And setting his work in his own time, he actually established a realistic style of writing that was to persist for centuries together, and that is why it is known as a magnum opus work. And his mere descriptions of the pilgrims in his prologue to the Canterbury Tales are considered by historians as the best picture of the 14th century England. Why? Because these portraits, Chaucer's own background and temperament is reflected in this poetry. He was a man of the world. He was a man who was humane, who was tolerant, who was amused also by his fellow men, and he had shown a profound understanding of the human motivation. And he was a very, humorous person, both for his characters and on some of his most critical and social problems of the day. And his tone basically ranges from comic to ironic and goes up to satirical sometimes, but always he reveals himself as a genial and as a warm-hearted person who has sympathy for his fellow men. So students, though the Canterbury Tales is often referred as to the first collection of short stories in English literature, these small stories